Hello and welcome to Mindscapes, our series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today has been a pioneering environmental advocate, activist, journalist, a list that goes far too long to detail in this brief introduction. Sufficient to say that he has embodied the citizens' agenda for the environment. He's received, again, awards and recognition too numerous to list, most recently the Padma Bhushan and the Global Environment Leadership Award. I'm delighted to welcome Anil Agarwal.
Hi, Rajiv.
Hi. Anil, you have been embodying so many different roles with amazing amounts of energy and commitment and have been remarkably prolific in the many things that you do. What is this sort of core anguish idea? What motivates you on this issue of the environment? Why is it so seminal?
Actually, you've used the correct word, anguish. You know, I was born soon after independence and then happened to go to a place like the IIT Kanpur. And the whole idea was that we were all going to get educated and solve India's problems. And now that you're 50 years old, half the century of the country and your own is gone, and you realize what a mess this country is. When you go abroad and look at other countries and even poor countries of Asia and the remarkable work that is happening, and compared to the fact that we have some of the brightest people in the world, I mean, whatever be the dirt and the filth of this country, minds of Indians are excellent as compared to anybody else. And yet you see the state of the country. And that really makes you feel angry. And I get angrier and angrier. For a long time, I kept writing. And you kept producing books. And one thought, you know, as Gunnar Myrdal had once told me, that books are like time bombs. You know, if the idea is correct, one day those ideas will explode. I soon began to realize in India that it doesn't really work as a time bomb because it has too long a fuse. So one realized that, you know, unless you had ideas and at the same time you're prepared to advocate those ideas, it really didn't work. So from a writer, I also turned into an advocate and an activist. So, I mean, that's how the list sort of keeps growing. And then, of course, when you have only a problem to pose, people will always and rightly turn around and say, but where are the solutions? And then you become a policy researcher and you start looking at what possible technologies and how you're going to get them through society, therefore what kind of economic policies you need, what are the kind of social considerations you need, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
What were some of the sort of the major resistances, as it were, that you came up against in putting forth this environment agenda? Was it sort of an area that you have worked hard to put out, that the assumption that somehow development or economic growth can be inhibited and limited, restrained by consideration of the environment, and that's something that we need to not worry about for a while at least?
You know, on the contrary, there of course has been a lot of resistance from, so to say, the vested interests. I mean, the people who make money out of development. And anybody who's making money by dumping, you know, pollution into the river Yamuna will always say, well, you know, it's cheaper to do it and we cannot afford high costs and so on and so forth. But somebody does pay the cost, and usually it's the poor. I mean, you can have all these polluting sort of cars and scooters and three-wheelers and taxis running in Delhi, but ultimately when somebody gets cancer, even if you assume that the rich and the poor get an equal amount of cancer, the rich can at least get treated. Take my case. I mean, I've had cancer 3 times in just 6 years, but I've been able to get the treatment. How many poor people will be able to even afford that treatment? So ultimately, there's a differential impact on the poor people. Therefore, as we said many years ago in the early 80s, that environmental destruction and social injustice goes hand in hand.
In the mid-80s, when Rajiv Gandhi was Prime Minister, he invited you to address the Council of Ministers and in Parliament and place this agenda in the legislative domain, as it were. And we have a fairly good record of legislative protection, of legislature-initiated activism on issues in the environment. And yet, you know, the system fails to deliver on them. Do you feel frustrated?
Yes, I'm very frustrated because, as I said, you know, I would have liked to see an India which is, you know, really remarkable by this time, and I would have loved to play a role in it. No, really what has happened is that we have been extremely prolific in passing laws. I mean, I think we have passed a law every week since the start of the independence in this country. You know, the best law is one which constitutes rules which have a social consensus behind them, where people feel that they want to follow that rule. And that has not happened, and that's been the unfortunate part of it. It's extraordinary that Indians are the most structured people when it comes to interpersonal relationships, who they marry, what they eat, you know, what they wear, all these kinds of things are observed. But when it comes to relationship with the state and its laws and so on, they become totally unstructured. Somehow, democracy in this country only exists in the electoral system. Beyond that, the government has no democracy. It's one of the most dictatorial governments that I've ever seen. Pass an order and then bully everybody. Otherwise, you know, there is no participation and things of that kind. People are beginning to realize this. I think when I joined as a young journalist, and I often used to say, you know, to people, well, I don't think all this is going to work. And young people, and the people used to say, oh, you're a young upstart, and of course you want things to happen very fast. We'll get it right. It will not happen very quickly, but we'll get it right. But now nobody says that. Everybody knows right at the top that things are wrong. We have to change quite dramatically. It'll change. It's slowly beginning to, things are coming in, decentralization, giving more power to the people, the way Digvijay Singh has done his watershed development program. I know when Rajiv Gandhi said, let's make tree planting a people's movement. The chairman of the National Wastelands Development Board at that time was a very good friend, and she often used to talk to me and say, Anil, how does government make a people's movement? I've never heard such an example. And Digvijay Singh has actually made watershed development a people's movement. It's a remarkable effort. It's now 15 years later that we can actually say that government can do that. The way in Kerala, the civil society forced the Kerala government, and that to a Marxist government, to decentralize and give 40% of the state budget to Gram Panchayats. And look at the things that they're doing. I mean, I was amazed when one of our reporters went there. We found that, you know, people are using money for making artificial reefs. In one village, there were a lot of suicides, so they're doing a mental health program. You know, I mean, where in this government would you have this kind of thing in villages? And yet, this is what people are using that money for, deciding on the needs. So it's beginning to roll. It will not happen overnight. It'll take its own time to spread across the country. But I mean, I feel positive in the long run. In the short term, of course, I feel very pessimistic.
You have emerged almost sort of an icon for the environment movement, for the cause of the environment. You're able to invite the President of India to travel with you, to look at a success story in watershed management that you've been talking about, and suddenly that has a multiplier effect. What kind of responsibilities is that sort of placed on someone like you to be that icon, really?
Well, it just means that you have to be a lot more responsible. You have to be a lot more serious. The president himself is really a sort of an interesting story. I came to know him when I was a student activist, when I was in IIT Kanpur, and he had just come back as Consul General in Vietnam. And of course, those late 60s were the days when everybody wanted to be, was interested in Vietnam. So I invited him to come to IIT Kanpur. And since then, I've kept touch with him. And he didn't know I'd become an environmentalist, and I didn't know he'd become the president. And therefore, we have always been very fond of each other. He's given me a lot of respect. And therefore, when I insisted that he come actually to the village to give the award, because I wanted the entire Rajasthan government to be present. That was one of the key reasons. So that they would at least begin to understand, to see these things. And Mr. Narayanan immediately agreed. I must tell you, it was a remarkable experience we all had. This was end of March, and very bad sort of drought period. In fact, in that area, this was the second year of drought. And all the way from Delhi to Alwar, when we were flying in this helicopter, we saw nothing but barren fields, nothing but barren. And suddenly we saw these huge golden brown, you know, green fields. And I said to Mr. Narayanan, I said, sir, this must be groundwater here. And suddenly we realized that this is where we were landing. And after that, nobody had to say anything about the importance of rainwater harvesting. And it was so clear that this had become an oasis in the middle of total barrenness. It does place a very important responsibility. One has to be very careful. And I do get criticism. For example, when I talk about the need for equity in international issues and so on and so forth, but I also talk about, controlling pollution in Delhi, which often may mean that, the scooter walas or the three-wheelers or taxi walas may get affected by that. People write to me saying, you're not being consistent. I mean, one hand you're fighting for the poor, on the other hand you're not. Though my argument is that there we are talking about sharing a global resource, and therefore everybody should have an equal right. Here we're not talking about sharing anything. We are here saying control pollution.
Right.
And I don't think anybody has the right to pollute, whether it's the rich or the poor.
I think one of the sort of the challenges to the issue of the environment for certainly those of us living in urban areas and with our privileges is that it often seems something out there.
Yes.
Because we're able to relatively insulate ourselves. So there's a problem with water. We purify our water. We have access, privileged access to resources. And we struggle with what is it that we can individually do that would make a difference. In your life as an urban dweller, apart from this larger sweep of your life and working on the environment agenda, what are the little things that you feel you do every day that contribute to this in tangible terms?
Rajiv, one of the first things is to get your mind correct. People who decide, who form opinions, everything else are really urban animals. And so often you come across people who have never been to a village. And that kind of thing has to happen as part of our education somehow. It's like Gandhiji. Gandhiji also, when he came back to India after South Africa, first took a lot of travel to understand what this country is all about. And it is large, it is very diverse, it is an extraordinary sort of beauty and everything else. But unless you go and see it face to face, unless you sit with the Nagas in their village or with Rajasthani women, I mean, you really don't understand it. So that's one of the key things. Then you begin to realize, your relationship with other human beings. And it is out of that comes a relationship with nature. I mean, as I would say, कि लोगों का रिश्ता और लोगों का प्रकृति के साथ जो रिश्ता है, they all go together. Once you start respecting other human beings, you immediately start respecting nature. I will not throw my dirt around, if I know that, I respect my neighbor. I will not pollute the waters of the river Yamuna when I know that somebody else is going to be drinking it. It is a relationship between human beings and people. And therefore, then you begin to look at it into your own life, and start saying, why am I doing this? Can I avoid using a car? Can I avoid doing this? Can I, do my own rainwater harvesting? Should I, if I'm using a car, should I move away to CNG? And so on and so forth. And you have to do both things. The little things that you can do in your life, but in the modern world, as we all know, it's not enough for individual action. You also need social action. And you also have to fight for social action,
What are some of the key issues that are coming up that you feel that the rest of the world is beginning to respond to? We read in the papers that during President Clinton's visit, almost sort of aside, we were signing away the commitment, in a sense, of the United States to put its own house of order, and we were taking on some of their environment liabilities, for example. So what are some of the engaging issues that are sort of going on beneath the surface that you're working on?
Well, I'm glad you asked this question because, when the Rio conference was taking place, we were very much involved at that time, both me as an individual and my institution, in looking at land forest management within the country. And we're getting very excited by the work of Anna Hazare and a whole variety of people. And we wanted to work exclusively on that because we felt that, this has a lot to do with poverty in this country. And this is one great way to transform poverty. Anna Hazare's village in the 70s was a very destitute village, and today it is one of the richest villages, simply because it has managed its water, its land very well, so it produces a lot of crops, and today it even exports them to Dubai, and therefore, organic vegetables, so they get a lot of money. It's amazing. I mean, there are almost 27% of the households. We did a survey with the help of the Delhi University, and they earn almost 5 lakhs of rupees. It's remarkable for a village. Now, we wanted to work on these kind of issues. But then what happened was, and this was thanks to Maneka Gandhi, she was the minister at that time, a very good friend. Later on, we fought with each other. She went abroad and met people and started saying, you know, we are destroying the Earth's atmosphere because we produce rice, which produces methane. We keep too many cows whose burps produce a lot of methane, and so on and so forth. We should stop keeping rice, stop growing rice and having cows and so on. Somehow she was blaming the poor for destroying the Earth's atmosphere. Now, I was sitting one day over dinner and listening to the television, and there was these kind of statements being made. And I said, listen, all my life I've worked, and I've never seen the poor destroy the environment. And if at all they do something wrong, with education they can actually do a lot of good things. But for the poor to be destroying the Earth's atmosphere is something that didn't make any sense to me. And therefore, I got into this, and there was a institution in Washington which had just published a report which had put a lot of blame on India and China and so on. And I took their own model, and this is where my engineering and mathematical skills came in. And I took their own data, but I just changed one assumption, you know, because every model has assumptions, you know. So I looked at the assumption and just changed one assumption, and you know, the Earth has a certain capacity to absorb carbon dioxide. So I said that capacity, which is largely because of the oceans, is a common heritage of humankind and therefore belongs equally to everybody. So on that basis, I distributed that capacity and then came up with dramatically different results, and that really shocked everybody. So when the negotiations were going on, it sort of played a very important role, and the whole issue of equity came in and so on and so forth. You mentioned Clinton. The United States has been the most difficult country. It's much easier to work with the Europeans, I've found. I personally find it very easy because a lot of old friends today are advisors to prime ministers, or they become ministers themselves through the green parties and so on. I mean, I've been working in the field of environment for now 20, 25 years. So a lot of the people who are with me today are in those kind of positions. So you can actually go and speak to them face to face, and they tend to listen to you and often are very supportive. But the United States is very difficult. And it's also a country which is very funny. I can't understand its democracy. I've always said to my friends in Europe that I can easily work Indian democracy. I can, to a certain extent, even work European democracy. I can write articles in papers. I can get an article in the London Times. I can get it in Le Monde and so on. But I don't know how to get an article in New York Times. It's just impossible, you know. And I do not know how to reach out to senators. I do not know how to reach out to the administration in the United States and so on. And even my friends in the US can't tell me how to do it. So it's very difficult for all of us in the developing world. I'm just giving my experience as an example, but all of us face this problem.
You probably have to find the money to hire an American lobbyist in Washington.
Precisely. I mean, the only thing my American friends tell me, the only way to deal with it is take out an ad in Washington Post, you know, full page ad, you know, that's the only way it works. Who has the money to do those kind of things? I mean, if that is the only way democracy works, then it is a very sad thing. But we will have to confront the United States in a very, very big way when it comes to ecological issues.
You mentioned the Green Party. Has it ever sort of occurred to you that maybe you have a future role in a more active, direct political sense?
Well, first of all, I don't think a Green Party will work in India because for this very simple reason that it does not, the Indian electoral system doesn't allow it. If I were to form a Green Party today, I can assure you that I will be able to get 5% of the votes, maybe even 10%. It's a matter of great concern, and when you link it with poverty issues and water issues and drought and all those kind of things, you will get a lot of support. But 10% of the votes spread across the country will not get you a single seat in parliament, not one seat. In India, the only way to work would be to work with the parties themselves, the major dominant parties, and try and make them as green as possible and so on and so forth. I would like at some stage to work with the political system.
Tell me, you alluded to your cancer. In what ways has that sort of affected you, influenced you? For many people, to sort of have one encounter with cancer is a transforming experience. You've had 3. In what ways has it affected you? I don't mean just physiologically, but
yes, I mean 2 or 3 different ways. One in terms of my respect for human beings. You know, when the first time I had this cancer and nobody in India could even diagnose it, it was in my eyes. There was huge amount of lines, and I had almost gone blind in my left eye. And when it started in my right eye, I really panicked. I was going blind. And being a writer, I didn't know how I would live if I went blind. And finally, I was able to find a doctor in the United States who was treating this cancer, which not even 200 people in the whole world had got by that time. I was amazed that there was a doctor who was actually working on a problem of 200 people. And I began to realize time and again that all the mercies of the great God actually come to you through the hands of your human beings. So it was all the friends, who had given me the help. So whether it was in Paris, whether it was Washington and Delhi, the amount of love and support that I got, the excellent doctors who were there, all those kind of things. So for me, God is really that human collectivity, And it keeps improving. The knowledge keeps improving. I mean, if that knowledge of science was not there, I would not have been alive today, and so on and so forth. So that's been one thing. For me, the respect for human beings has gone up enormously. And therefore, as an environmentalist, we often have disrespect for science. We have all these kind of things. I don't really believe in that. I really believe that, the human enterprise, the human mind, all that put together, a lot of it could be wicked, but a lot of it is also very, very good and very benign and very humane and everything else. In a sense, it's the Buddhist concept of the Paramatma. The Paramatma is really the collection of all the Atmas, which is you and me, all our Atmas is what makes the Paramatma. That is at one level. But at another level, it has made me very angry about something, and which I didn't realize, and I often called myself very stupid. When Rajiv Gandhi asked me to address his council of ministers, I particularly emphasize rural environmental problems. It's for the simple reason and a logical reason that they affect many more millions of people in this country, many more poor people. So I said focus on that. Other environmental problems are not that important. I had no idea that in just 15 years, from the mid-80s to the end of this century, how badly polluted Delhi will become, and the speed with which pollution will grow. And the more I looked at cancer data and so on, and I was treated in one of the most important cancer research institutions in the United States and the world, the National Cancer Institute. They had great epidemiologists and everything else, which I had a chance to interact with them, talk to them. And one realized that particularly the cancer I had, the blood cancer that I had, is growing across the world. Nobody really knows why, and people feel pollution has a lot to do with it. Exposure to chemicals, pesticides, those kind of things. Because if cancer is growing, then something else also has to be growing to make that match. And therefore, I became very conscious of pollution, which I was not.
In a very personal way.
It begins with a very personal way. There is a great anger because, why should anybody have to suffer this? And you need to take the right kind of actions. You have to be very conscious about it. And the wonderful thing about the Western technological model is it's a very toxic model, because the Western technological model uses a lot of energy and a lot of materials. It processes all that. And in that process, it produces a lot of waste products, some of which extremely carcinogenic and so on and so forth. And we are adopting this model without thinking through how to handle it. In the West, the same thing happened between 1945 and 1960. In just 15 years, as the economy grew very rapidly, all the rivers, all the cities became extremely polluted. And then started the big environmental movement, pressure on the politicians to do something. Those countries then, A, had discipline to implement the laws. Two, they invested a lot of money. There's some figures to show that after the 70s, the Minamata disease and all those kind of things in Japan, those horror stories, almost 25% of industrial investment was in pollution control. Now, where are we going to find this in our country? Can we make this kind of investment? Secondly, do we have that kind of discipline? We are an extremely corrupt country. We like to bypass every possible law. So therefore, the Western strategy of dealing with it, I don't see it working out very well here. But for me, it's almost like a mission. I have to make sure that Delhi becomes clean. I'm glad the Supreme Court is with us, but neither the Delhi government is with us nor the central government is with us. Of course, the automobile industry doesn't like us one bit. But it is something that one has to fight for. And today, one of the biggest challenges I face, and my colleagues in the center face, is that we're working more and more too much on Delhi. We have to spread it all across the country because it's often said that Delhi is one of the most polluted cities in the world. That is because WHO looks at 20 cities in the world. But when you start looking at data for Indian cities, from our own Central Pollution Control Board, you find that Kanpur and Lucknow and others are even worse than Delhi. So, you know, we are in a really bad state of affairs and becoming worse by the day. And therefore, people have to stand up everywhere. We did a very simple exercise, taking Mexico City. Mexico City has a simple rule, like many other Western countries, that when pollution reaches a certain level, when elderly people or children are likely to fall severe asthma or get a heart attack and die the next day, you know, those kind of situations, then you close down the city. You stop half the traffic, or you stop all the traffic, you close down factories, you know, all those kind of things to bring the pollution levels down. Nothing like that happens in Delhi. And I can tell you the kind of levels that operate in Delhi, I've not been able to find them in any other city in the world. Of course, the database on all the cities is very poor, but whatever data exists, Delhi is absolutely one of the worst, literally the worst in many ways. But nobody tells you that on a certain December, please don't get out of your house. You know, today is a very bad day. Close down the schools. There should be no playgrounds, nothing of the kind. So we said, let's look at the rules of Mexico City and apply them to Delhi. Will you believe it? We found that Delhi would be closed half the time in the whole year.
My goodness.
So that was the state of affairs.
In this sort of personal interface between your own struggle with the disease and your professional work, what has been the synergy for you? Do you feel a greater sense of the spirit, the spiritual, of the Paramatma that you have mentioned? You've had 3 lives, may there be 6 more at least. What has it done to you as a
well,
human
actually,
being?
as I said, it has made me more angry. And it has made me feel very mortal. You know, till all these things happen, you know, you never realize that you're going to die one day. And when you know that you have cancer, you know, you literally feel, you know, that I'm going to die very soon. I was able to get out of it is a different issue, but I mean, the first time you're told that, or even the second time, that's the first thought that comes to your mind. And therefore, you feel very mortal. And therefore, it's given me even a stronger drive. That, well, if I have 2 years to live or 5 years to live, maybe 20, I do not know, that's all up to God. And that human collectivity that I talked about. You know, I feel, you know, I should work even harder to do something, you know, before God calls me.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks.
And good luck. This has
Thank
been a
you.
great privilege. Thank you.